Okay, so I was just recently in a conversation and was attempting to further clarify this notion of growing older together and how it bears upon the rise of asynchronous communication. And I thought it was a difficult task. It was harder than I thought it would have been. I'm not sure what the sandbagging or difficulty was, but I want to lay out a little bit more clarification here to see if this can't help, and then hopefully this can further stimulate response and dialogue and discussion. When Schutz talks about growing older together, he's talking about the primacy of one particular privileged kind of involvement. It's the face-to-face encounter, as it is in what was called the life world, the everyday mundane encounter between people where they actually are co-present to one another. And this growing older together has to do with a co-occupying of streams of consciousness toward a given object of attention, where the two of them unfold along that together. See, I think Heidegger offers great insight here. He says, that the subject is time and time is the subject. And it's a wonderful line. He's not just talking about topics, he's talking about the person. The person is time. Now, in the face-to-face involvement, in the face-to-face interaction, I think it's easy to imagine it visually, to try to say, oh yes, visually we grow older together. I'm not sure that we do. I think in vision, if we just reduce one sense at a time, now if we sort of vivisect the body and reduce it to, okay, there's one sense and there's another sense. I mean, in actual unfolding, your body integrates all the different senses and you can't really parcel out the contributions of each. But I think here for analysis, if we try to just focus on what sight gives a simultaneous field of which the wandering glance can select moments and places of attention. What that means is that the field of sight, the field that I can see, is simultaneous to itself, and the wandering glance allows a returning to objects that you look away and then you look back. And because everything in the field was simultaneous to itself, I mean largely, this isn't true of everything in sight, but this is the rough characteristic of vision. And we can really see this when we compare it to hearing. Now, hearing is an unfolding. Certainly you can focus in your attention. For example, if you're listening to a symphony, wandering attention can sort of float in and out of the different instruments or the different sections of the symphony, but you can't have a retention in a simultaneous field for a wandering a sensibility that then returns. If anything, you return to a kind of retentional memory of what had just passed, but sound gives sequence. It doesn't give simultaneity. Sight gives a simultaneous field. Again, you don't parcel these distinctions out for the most part in everyday experience. For the most part in everyday experience, we seem to integrate the different spatio-temporal characteristics of the different senses really without noticing it. Once we analytically parcel out the difference between sight and hearing, we're in a kind of catbird seat to understand Schutz's notion of growing older together and how the rise of asynchronous communication. And by that I mean communication like this, right here, right now, where it's not just non-synchronous like book culture. Book culture has one person growing older and then they create the thing and then another person grows older, or there's maybe groups talking about the book, which is sort of this face-to-face synchronizing that Schutz was talking about. But this asynchronous communication that I'm trying to drive at is more the sensibility of this here right now, where you're growing older with another, but you're not growing older together. See, I think books, especially, a text gives the eye a chance for a wandering glance to look at what's simultaneous to itself. Now, you do have to read somewhat linearly, but not really. You can hop around in a text. You can bobble back and forth. You can look up words. You can go reread a sentence, read the paragraph, go reread that sentence, then skip ahead, then go back, cross-check. It's really hard to do that in an audio tape. It's very, very hard to do this here right now. You're actually engaging in an unfolding that is a listening, and in the listening, you're growing older with me, although I've already left. I'm not there, but you're experiencing the kind of intimate face-to-face growing older, but it's asynchronous. I think the concern is the rapidity of change that is now happening in the culture. I'm not for it, I'm not against it. I'm trying to describe it. I think some people, when they hear me suggest that there is a rise of asynchronous communication, I think they hear me either condemning it or praising it. I'm not doing either of those. I think that more and more people would benefit from trying to ask themselves, what is the privileged place where reality gets constructed? I've been trying to say that Alfred Schutz, who was the intellectual heir that became the social constructionist movement. I mean, if people want to know what social constructionist in socialist, what people want to know what social constructionist theory is in sociology, they would do well to know the name Alfred Schutz. I mean, Schutz really was one of the main players who constructed this notion that reality is partly made through the social typifications that were shared and distributed in the stock body of knowledge in a given culture, and the way that knowledge was constructed is through a primacy of the face-to-face encounter. And there's this growing older together. Now, whether one wants to talk about mimesis and ontogenetic coupling or the mirroring between the mother and the infant, there's a lot of different ways to get at this issue of what it means to grow older with another. But the growing older together, I think, is the privileged one for Schutz. This capacity to grow older with another when the other isn't there, I think it's very interesting. I'm not sure what it means. To me, if anything, it means the culture will rapidly change. I'm not, for good, for ill, I don't know. And it's certainly not sweepingly the culture. If anything, little micro pockets of the culture are spinning out with these little tiny changes and micro changes in the culture. Small communities, microsects communities are happening. At any rate, I hope that people are interested in this idea of synchronous versus asynchronous and how that bears upon growing older together. I would encourage people to really take a moment and reflect for a second on how different sight is, how different sound is, and how sound, it's not truer to who you are, but I think sound gives a better orientation toward the subject as time than vision does. Vision has become the bias in the culture, and because of that, there's all kinds of dynamics that are not being maybe registered with full recognition. I think if people could attend to sound and the way that we grow older with another through sound, in particular through sound of voice, and I think it's being recovered. For centuries, it was lost in literate culture and in the whole readings going on. That's a very modern notion, right? Traditionally, scriptorium were bawdy places where people yelled and screamed and they argued with one another and they read texts aloud. The notion of the silent reader is a very, very modern notion, but it's also a visual notion. It's a visual bias, and that the kind of synchronizing of culture is happening at a distance with one or another, not together. It's a very interesting time to try to understand the communication technologies and what's happening. Okay, thanks.